Hello. So yeah, my name is David Hilditch, or in Greek, Davy Hilditch is how I think you say it. But I want to tell you a bit about my background. I've been coding since I was 6 years old. I've been doing performance optimization for a lot of my life. And I'll tell you about how I came to live in Paros, which is where I live now. But basically, I got hired by a company called Skyscanner to solve their flight search problem. So in the interview, they asked me, they presented a problem, and I told them, look, there's 3 different ways that you can approach fixing this problem, approach the functionality of it. One of them using correlated subqueries, you definitely don't do that. And then I saw them nudging each other, like, this is what we've done. So then they hired me for this job. I joined as a temporary contractor. They extended me for another 3 months. And then they were trying to convince me to turn permanent, but the sticking point for me was that I wanted to live in Paros every summer. So they gave me in my contract, they said, you can work from Paros for 2 months every summer, which it worked nicely for 3 years until I had 10 people in my database team, and it just wasn't practical anymore. So when I left, after I've left there, I was working on building some affiliate websites, and then by their nature, they're quite large, and that's when I started finding performance problems in WordPress, and I decided to go about solving them. Okay, so I'm going to, the first couple of slides are going to talk about the amount of energy that WordPress uses. So when I was trying to figure out how to calculate this, there's a few different ways that you can look at it. I mean, there's a quite common statistic people know about for the percentage of websites that use WordPress. It's about 35%, but that doesn't match up to how much traffic is going through WordPress websites. A lot of WordPress websites are quite small. So I tried to find out what the percentage of traffic hitting WordPress websites is, and finding out the average price of hosting helped with this. Okay, so there's some interesting figures here. So WordPress, is about 35% of websites, 455 million websites. That's quite a lot. The total hosting space, not just WordPress, all of hosting is about 77 billion per month. And then it's about $4 per average, very cheap, that people are paying for the WordPress hosting. So then you can work out from that there's about 2 billion getting spent per month on WordPress hosting. And if you use that figure to calculate the traffic level, then it looks like about 2.5% of traffic is hitting WordPress websites. And websites use about 5% of electricity worldwide, so it's not an insignificant amount of energy that's getting used. Okay, so I'm going to cover the types of inefficiencies that you get in the WordPress ecosystem. These are the most common ones. So I've been doing performance optimizations for clients with big sites with million plus products for the past 5 years. A lot of these solutions I've distilled into one of my plugins. Some of you might have heard of Scalability Pro. That's probably my most famous plugin. But these are the most common problems that you get for inefficiency. So the first one is running code when it's not required. There's quite a few cases of this that I'll show in the next slide. And then there's excessive options size. So if any of your developers, you know that there's a nice little function WordPress provides to save data into your options table, but this gets abused. People save massive objects into that table. And then if they only want to update one piece of data or fetch one piece of data, they're still fetching megabytes and saving megabytes on every page. And then there's the table scan problem, which is quite common as well, and WP query abuse. By WP query abuse, what I mean is that sometimes people use WP query just to check if something exists. They say, only get me one row. I just want to see if this exists. But they forget to take the order by parameter off. And so then in order to get that one row, it still has to go through and sort all the data and come back. And all they want to know is, does one of these values exist? And then I want to talk about cache busting as well, because that's still a big problem that we have. Okay, so I'm sorry if anybody here is from Contact Forms, Pop-Up Builder, Mailjet, or MailChimp, but this is a problem that exists in most plugins. So this here, if you see it on the screen, this is a performance optimization for a client of mine, right? So they had not a huge amount of products, something like 200,000. But so I cloned their server over to my performance server, where it deliberately is a slower server so that I can really highlight where the performance problems are. But just by removing plugins that weren't needed on their shop archive, just by doing that, then the performance drops from 8.39 to 3 seconds. So it's almost three times faster. There's a great plugin called Asset Cleanup Pro, not my plugin, but it's a brilliant plugin that lets you unload plugins on the front end. So I highly recommend you check it. You can check with the free version, you can find out all the plugins that are running code on your front end. These are common ones. I mean, you have Contact Form 7 that's running code on every page, even if there's no contact form on the page. And some of these, once your site gets bigger, they're actually checking, they're running table scans as well, so it's really, really quite inefficient. Okay, yeah, so the excessive option size and misuse of auto-load, like I said, there's megabytes of data loaded on every page. This is a problem that I found actually about 2018. I found a problem for Yoast. He had released an update, and they basically were saving lots of options into the options table, but also they'd set them to auto-load, which means that they were loading on every single page. I told him about it, and he fixed it, I think within a week. Might even have been the same day. But this is it's a problem that exists for a lot of people because you start off saving small amounts of options, and the great thing about the options table is you're storing objects, so it's flexible. As requirements change over time, you can add new things into it. But at some point, if you're only fetching one piece of data and you're having to grab megabytes of data, then you really should start thinking about refactoring how you store your data. And what you should be doing is maybe start thinking about using your own custom table structures. Okay, so this, sorry, Yoast. This is another problem that happens with Yoast. Yeah, so actually there was one, the limit one query is actually something that happens with WooCommerce. And I have a demo site with 1 million products on it. And I think that's on the, hold on, I think that's on the next slide. Yes. So on the next, you see here, what this is Query Monitor, by the way, for anybody that doesn't know. And what you see here is they're grabbing one item. There's a function in the middle called isComplete. And the code in here, it doesn't do anything with this data that it grabs. Doesn't do anything at all. It just wants to know, does it exist or is it null? And then if you see there, it takes 30 seconds. And if you take out the order by, then it takes 0.01 seconds. Okay. So there's just some fundamental things. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the solution for this, I've suggested a solution to WooCommerce. But the real solution here is that the way that WP Query works, it puts a sort order on by default, right? And probably that should change. It should probably not sort by default. But then if you change that, then you're probably going to break a lot of stuff. So, it's one of these problems. But with WooCommerce, basically, I've suggested to them, can you please, if you're checking just for existence of data, don't order the data. Okay, so, and then this problem here, this was with the Yoast. Yeah, this is the Yoast sitemaps. So their sitemaps are faster a little bit now. They're still not as fast. But I actually did if you Google it, if you Google WP Intense, that's my company name, sorry. If you Google that with XML sitemaps, you'll see I do full analyses of when I'm doing performance jobs for people. I document it all and put it all up there on my website. And this was a client, they had 1.5 million products. You see here, this is how long their queries were taking, 4 minutes, 13 seconds to grab the first page of their sitemap. So they had a great website that was spreading with word of mouth, but they couldn't get any SEO because the Googlebot was coming and kept saying there's no sitemap, right? Because Googlebot would give up. So in the end, what I did for them, I looked at the three different XML sitemap plugins. The Yoast one I couldn't optimize, but there's one that's in the WordPress.org repository, better WordPress Google XML sitemaps. It's quite a mouthful of a name. But that plugin, literally just by adding one index to the database, delivers this performance. If you can see that at the bottom, that's 4 minutes, 13 seconds, drops down to 0.89 seconds to get any page of your sitemaps. Okay, so then there's cache busting. This is another problem that exists in the WordPress ecosystem. If you have performance problems, the most common answer is cache your pages. The second most common answer is spend more money on hosting. Page caching is great. It is really great. But it's not great if you can't use it. And the most valuable customers that you've got are the ones that are uncached. If you think of how in WooCommerce, as soon as somebody adds an item to the basket, any of you here that have ever configured your page cache, you basically, if you spot this cookie, if you spot that somebody's added something to the basket, then you prevent page caching from happening, okay? Now that means that if you've got a busy site where a lot of people come and immediately the first thing they do is add the item to their basket, it can crash your website if you get a flood of people from social media. And it's really not fair. I mean, the people that are your most valuable customers, they should be getting a cached page as well. So all of this stuff, if you're adding something to the basket, this should be happening with Ajax. So the same page could get served up for everybody and just fetch the basket using Ajax. Pretty much for the page caching, when it happens, this is whenever there's any user-specific data that gets displayed on page. So if any of you are developers, then you should, if it's user-specific data, then you should really use Ajax so that people can still cache the pages where that functionality is used. Okay, so what can developers do to improve performance? So the first thing is avoid table scans. So test your plugins at scale. You won't know if you're developing and you're testing, you have 50 products or 50 posts in your site. You won't know if you have a performance problem. So one of the things I've done, I've made a testing site. If any of you want a clone of it, I can give you a clone of it. It's got 60,000 products on it already loaded. So you can install all your own plugins. You can find out if you have any issues. Once you know where your issues are, it's a lot easier to fix them. But yeah, basically avoid table scans. On my website, there are guides about doing this. They go into a lot of depth. I don't want to go into depth about it here. But basically, a table scan means that you're fetching all of the data when you don't need to get all of the data. So if you think, if you have a WooCommerce website with 100,000 products, if it does a table scan, then it will read all 100,000 products just to show you the first 20 products. Okay, so obviously that's not good, right? It should just be getting the first 20 products. So another thing, avoid loading all data and processing it with PHP. Excuse me a sec. So this was a problem that used to exist with the price filter in WooCommerce. They've fixed it since, but what they did was, if you know the price filter in WooCommerce, it brings up a little range box, a range slider. And so if you're on your clothing page, then it tells you the prices are from €5 up to €150. Now the way that it used to do that is it used to read all of your data, get it all, and then load each of those products into a product object, and then it would say what's the minimum price for this product. If it's a variable product, then there are price ranges. What's the minimum? What's the maximum? Is that less than the minimum I've got so far? Is it more than the maximum that I've got so far? And it would basically read all of the data. They used a lot of RAM and a lot of disk. So very inefficient. So if you can avoid loading all data into PHP, if you can do a query directly against the database, then it is going to be faster. Obviously, in the WordPress ecosystem, we have a really cool system with filters and hooks, especially the filters. Sometimes with filters, then it means that you can't read the data directly from the database. And as I've got a plugin that fixes your search, makes your search faster. And there's an option inside that where if you don't use filters to change the names, maybe if you're not using translation plugins, then you can just read the data directly from the database, and it makes it a lot faster. And then the one I discussed before, avoid massive objects in WP options. I mean, I understand where it comes from. You know, it is flexible, but if you end up with a lot of options, you see WooCommerce moving towards this kind of stuff now. They've got their own table structure for product attributes. And you see some other companies like WP All Import, they have their own table structure where they used to store stuff in WP options. It's just faster. If you build your own table structure, it's going to be a lot faster than storing everything in WP options. Because what it means is if you only want one piece of data, then you can just read that one piece of data. You don't have to read the full megabyte or full 2 megabytes of data that you have stored. You know, obviously it's inefficient if you only need one piece. And it's worse than that as well, because what happens then is if people are using their object cache, if they're using Redis, then you really end up hammering Redis. And Redis is fast, but it's fast for fetching and retrieving small pieces of data. So, you know, if you're fetching megabytes at a time, this is one of the most common problems. This is pretty much a checklist of stuff I do for performance analysis. But if you have that problem, then you need to clean up your options table. If you're a developer, then try to stop using big options. And then another one I covered already, so remove the sort order from WP query, especially if all you're doing is checking for existence of data. Then you don't need to sort the data. And there's plenty other times when really sorting it isn't relevant either. So, you know, consider that. It's not always applicable, but consider it. And then, yeah, so learn how to use the object cache. So there's 2 ways that the object cache works in WordPress. So first of all, if you don't have an object cache actually installed like Redis, then you still get a benefit from the object cache. If you have a function which reads some data, builds some stuff, and then if that function gets called multiple times on a page, then with the way that WordPress will work by default, if you store that item in the transients, then it will reuse it on the same page if you store it in the cache. So instead of calling your function 1,000 times, instead of running that code 1,000 times, then you only need to run that once on the page. And then it gets better if you actually use a proper object cache like Redis, because then these fragments can be reused from page to page. So it's really easy to code support for the object cache. It's pretty much wherever you have your code already, at the end of it, you save the output, if you have an object or if it's HTML, whatever you want, ideally small pieces. But if you have the output, then you save that into the object cache at the end of your function. And then at the beginning of the function, you check to see if that item is already in the object cache. And if it is, you just return it straight away. And you know, it's dead easy. It's not. You don't have to change. You don't have to change much to get the object cache to work. Yeah. So also avoid cache busting. Use Ajax for user-specific content. Like I said, there's the WooCommerce basket. There's also yeah. So there was in the past there was prices per country were also busting the page cache. But basically, it's where whenever you have any content that changes per user, that's normally where you're busting the cache. And in those cases, you really should use Ajax. So the same page can be served up to everybody. It comes straight out of the page cache. That means if it's the page cache, it might not even touch your server, the first page load, because you could be serving that up from Cloudflare or something. And then it's just this small query to grab whatever is user-specific. And that gets fetched after the event, you know, after the page is loaded. So the perceived performance is better, but also the load on your server is better, and, you know, it's important. And then the obvious one, don't run code on pages where your code is not needed. I mean, the example I showed you before, that was 9 seconds, roughly 8.5 seconds down to 3 seconds. Without doing any other performance optimization, just by stopping code running that shouldn't have been running. I'm guilty of this as well. I've got some of my plugins run code on some pages where they shouldn't, but really all of us should be getting better at this. And then, yeah, so like I already have this test rig with 60,000 products on it, but there's a guy, Jordan Trask, that wants to help me with this, and I'm keen on anybody else that's interested. What we're going to do is we're going to start a GitHub repo where you'll be able to build different test environments, however many products we can load. But if we make that open source, then we can get a lot more contributors, we can build up more test cases, and make it really easy for the plugin developers to actually, because this is actually part of the biggest problem, is that for developers to actually test their products at scale, they don't have a site to test it on. You know, they don't have a big site with a lot of products to actually test it on. So making that easy will help solve this problem. So if anybody's interested in that, I mean, you can find me on Twitter, Dave Hilditch on Twitter, and I'm keen to get that started. In the meantime, I do have I've got a multi-site cloner basically, and I can make a clone for you with these 60,000 products if you want to test your stuff already. Okay, and then if you're not a developer, what can you do today to improve performance? So the first thing, I know there's a big problem in WordPress where people complain that I'm meant to be running my business. I'm not meant to be maintaining a website. I'm not meant to be a performance expert. And quite often they get these extra requirements. But we are where we are. WordPress is how it is. But these tools can definitely help you today. So learn how to use Query Monitor, right? I showed you how it looked. I'll go back. So this is the Query Monitor output. There's some interesting things that you can find from it. You can see the amount of SQL time that was consumed. You can see the total page generation. And from that, you can infer how much CPU time it is. If there's 1 second database time, 5 seconds total time, unless there's API calls, then it's 4 seconds CPU time. But then things to look at are things like long-running queries. So if you've got a query that takes more than 0.1 second, that's slow. Look at optimizing that. Probably it needs an index. Maybe it needs rewritten. But you can get in touch with plugin developers to highlight these things. Also, you can look at the number of queries generated per plugin. Quite often that will highlight problems for you. And then look at the queries by row count. If there's plugins where they're fetching thousands of rows, then you probably will also see high RAM usage on this page. And if you see that, then you know that they're building objects with all of that data, and this is probably what's slowing down your website. Okay, so I mean, along with Query Monitor, it helps you find out which plugins are causing you issues. But then what to do, how to fix them, right? So obviously, if you need that plugin, then you obviously need it. But like, there's quite a lot of cases where you don't need these plugins to be running on these pages. Contact form plugins, the code needs to run on the contact form page. That's it, right? It doesn't need to run on your shop page. It doesn't need to run on your home page. The same for a lot of the pop-up plugins. There's other plugins like MailJet. Like, why is it running on the front end? You know, it should be running in cron. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff that you can do. And with Asset Cleanup Pro, especially if you have a staging site, if you have a copy of your website, it's very easy to disable these plugins on the front end and find out what kind of performance boost you get. The kind of things you're looking for obviously reduction in time used, but also reduction in RAM. If you reduce how much RAM your scripts are using, you can have more simultaneous users. And then, yeah, use an object cache. So there are some cases where if you install an object cache, your website will get slower. If that happens, that tells you that there's a plugin that is storing massive objects in the object cache. But the vast majority of cases, an object cache will really, really help your website speed up. And basically what it's doing is it's helping you reuse fragments of stuff that's complicated to generate. It's whatever code. It could be fragment. It could be objects. It could be HTML. But they're reusing that from page to page. So that helps especially for uncached pages. Yeah. So if you want to get in touch with me, my Twitter is Dave Hilditch. On Facebook, I think on Facebook I'm actually D Hilditch, but if you search for me, you'll find me. Also on GitHub, and my website is wpintense.com. We have a Discord server on our website. There's a link along the bottom of the website, so if any of you want to chat to me, you can come and just click that link. I'm there pretty much every day. And I'm any questions at all? Welcome for any questions.
And you are on our time zone. That's good. Thank you very much. A really, really interesting presentation. I do sense we're going to have quite a few questions. Who's going to be the first one?
I have a simple question here. On your left, there. Hey. So I would like to know how can you optimize multiple user-specific content that is fetched from AJAX requests? Because if you have like some B2B pricing logics or things you want to show on your pages and they are not invalidating cache, they should be coming from an AJAX request, right?
Sorry, I didn't. They're coming from where?
From AJAX requests. The data, you mean?
Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't understand the question.
I would like to know how I could optimize AJAX requests that are fetching user-specific content without invalidating cache.
Without invalidating the cache. Yeah, so, but I mean, if you don't want to, you're talking about invalidate, you don't want to invalidate the page cache.
Yeah, the
Right.
AJAX request doesn't do that, right?
Okay, so if you load your page, on the page, basically the HTML should be getting generated the same for everybody. And then whatever the user-specific content is, you should be fetching that using Ajax.
Yep.
Is that what the question is? Sorry, I don't.
This is the scenario.
Yeah.
I mean how I could optimize the code behind it. Because if I have multiple sections in a page where this behavior happens, on a high traffic website or even on a burst of traffic, I think I will have some performance issues.
Okay, do you know what your queries look like when they're fetching the data?
I don't know yet.
Okay, so I mean, like literally, it is about.
It's about multiple fragments of this behavior. I mean, in high traffic, if you have like, let's say, one query per component, in a huge load of traffic, this will generate a massive amount of queries. Is there a way to optimize for that?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, if the faster you make your queries, then the more simultaneous queries you're going to be able to do. MySQL can handle thousands of queries per second if they're fast, if they're indexed. But it's all about when you're optimizing a query. So first of all, you need an index that supports the query. So if you're filtering on user ID, it depends. I mean, it depends what your query is, right? So what the query parameter is. But if you're filtering on user ID, then it should be straightforward. You just have a primary key on the user ID and just fetch that one piece of data. But if you're filtering on 2 or 3 things, then and if you're sorting, I don't know if that's what's happening, but if you filter on three items and you sort, then the index needs to be on each of those 3 items in your filter, and then you need to have the directional index on your sort column. I'm not sure if that. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but like.
Yeah, kind of. Except from query optimization, isn't there any other technique that I could use in AJAX request specific to optimize the code snippets? I mean, reducing the queries or optimizing them is the basic.
Can you talk to me after this, and so I can understand?
Sure.
I might need to see what you're talking written down. But
Yeah.
I'll be able to help you. I'll definitely be able to help you. I just I don't really understand.
Nice.
Sorry. Talk to me after, yeah?
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for being here. In one of your first screenshots about the two terminals,
Yeah.
it was after the Yoast enabled, we have 13 seconds. Because the queries, I thought it was the same.
No, the query, there was one difference in the query was the order by was removed.
Order by was removed.
Yeah.
Thank you. I thought I saw both order by, based by ID, based by date.
No, one of them, that was there was the limit one query.
Yes?
And then one of them had order by on, and that took 30 seconds, and the one without order by.
Correct.
I mean, there was the Yoast one. There was another Yoast problem that I optimized for them. That was back in 2019. So when you're optimizing queries, if you do not equals, then it means that you have to check all data. You can't use an index on that part. And so what Yoast had added for some reason was post date not equal to 0000. And it wasn't needed, right? Because they already had another part of the query which confirmed that this wasn't a draft.
Yes.
They're because they're checking to make sure it wasn't a draft.
Yes.
And they already had another part of the query that was checking that. So taking out that date not equal to 000 meant it could use the index, and then it became faster.
I understand. Is it possible to add a index key of your date or of your or your ID? I think is indexed on WordPress.
The IDs are indexed, yes.
Yes. Is it possible to index the order by clauses to reduce the DB
Yes.
time?
If the column that you're ordering by is on the same table, then yes. And the way it needs to be is whatever's in your where clause or your join clause, those ones need to come first in the index, and then your order by column comes after that. And then the query optimizer will use this, and then everything's already in the right order. It doesn't actually need to sort anything. So it filters directly down a few table reads, filters directly down, and then grabs the first page of data that it needs.
So if we have filters, we can add indexes in order to get our data faster.
Yes.
Generally, in DB optimization,
Yes.
this is a DB optimization. Can I ask 2-3 points
Yeah.
in other topics? Of course.
Hello. Thank
Hello.
you for your wonderful presentation.
Oh, thank you.
I would like to know your point of view on caching and the WordPress nonce codes. You know, the security feature. Because whenever you have a form that requires a nonce code, this page must be not cached, as the nonce code has a validity of 12 to 48 hours, something like that, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Can we do something about it?
Yeah, so like it's, I mean, I personally don't think the WordPress nonces are all that secure. I mean, nonces are meant to be only used once. So the fact that somebody can come and find out what that nonce is, if they can get access to change the HTML, they could fetch whatever they wanted from the server. So I guess the answer is to not use nonces, but you have to be careful with your security then. I'd like to give you a more thorough answer, but maybe I'll look into this a bit more. Do you want to chat to me afterwards as well?
Yeah, of course. All right.
Because I love doing deep analysis of this stuff,
Perfect.
and I can add it onto my website. I'd
Perfect.
like to do
Looking
that.
forward to.
Yeah,
Thank you.
cool.
Another question I would like to ask you, if you have ever tried to optimize the DB as the package, how long can be the package? If I have a big website, make less requests with more data per read in the database. I don't know if you have, sorry, maybe you didn't hear me. Huh?
I didn't hear some of it.
Sorry,
So.
again. If you have a big site,
Yep.
and the DB takes too long to get all the data, have you ever tried, by your experience, have you ever tried to read bigger packets in the DB. This is a MySQL configuration. Have you ever tried?
Yeah, so that would like there's a lot of different config you can do in your MySQL to optimize it. I've got a full guide on my website with a whole bunch of different settings that you can tweak. I mean, there's one of them is the NODB speed, because it doesn't come default speed optimized for SSD disks, for example. But there are a few. There's like you can basically copy and paste them and put them into your config. But yeah, if you're reading bigger packets, it depends on what the data size is. It's not going to make that much of a difference.
Okay.
But I've got a whole bunch of stuff on my website that you can copy paste to test, to check, to improve this. And packet size is one of them, but it doesn't make as big of as a difference as the other
No
other
difference.
options.
Thank you very much.
Hi, over here. Thank you for your presentation. One question that's not so much of a developer perspective. When we use WordPress, we're talking about frequent updates, and we have to do them because of security reasons and compatibility issues also. So when we use plugins or we use the core WordPress itself or the WooCommerce itself, we cannot do much changes as far as the queries are concerned. So if we can't do that because we may lose the changes or we may break something when updates happen, what's the priority of the other issue, of the other measures we can take in order to eliminate the loss of not be able to change queries that bloat our website?
Okay, so you can, right? So I understand what you're saying. You don't want to alter the plugin files because then when an update comes, you can't get the data, right? But there's hooks that you can use. So there's different ways. This happens inside my plugin Scalability Pro. So if you get that, you can look at how I've done it. But basically, there's two different ways. You're looking for a fingerprint first of all. So inside, you can use pre-get posts because the vast majority of these queries they're using WP query, right, to grab the data. Some of them just do direct WPDB queries. But if it's using WP query, it'll be using pre-get posts filter. Inside there, you can check for your fingerprint to identify the problem query and alter it however you need to. Like take the order by off if that's something that needs to happen, or whatever you want. And then that will survive if you do that, if you implement that in another plugin or in your theme functions file, that will survive the plugin updates.
All right.
And then there's another way to do it. It's a little bit slower, but also, I mean, if you're optimizing something, then the net benefit is better. You can put a filter on the query, and you actually do a string check. It does slow things down very slightly, a few milliseconds slower, but if it speeds up the actual query, then it's worth it. And so what you do is you could do a string check, ideally not a regex, but you could even do a regex check and then alter the actual text of the query.
All right.
So that's another way, but that way is more likely to break when the queries change in future. So the best way is with pre-get posts.
All right.
And you can hook into there and then it survives plugin updates.
Nice. Thank you very much.
It's a quick one? Yeah, a very quick one then.
Have you seen any improvement if you run some of the managed services on AWS?
If I run what services?
The database on the managed services on AWS, like AWS Aurora database.
Yes, look, I've got some clients that I don't use AWS myself. I use DigitalOcean. But what's there? There's a sort of scalable MySQL database that Amazon has. Is that what it's called? Yeah. So I can't remember which client it was, but there was a client of mine that had that. And like sometimes when you're going for scalability, sometimes you reduce the performance, but it's worth it because now you can scale up to 10 servers, 100 servers, but you know your actual performance per page, per query is slightly slower. So in my experience with Aurora, I think it was Aurora it was called, but it was the Amazon scalable one. The actual performance per query is slower, but the advantage is you can scale. But yeah, I found it slower before, but I haven't used it much, to be honest.
Great, great. It was a highly engaging presentation. This is from the Greek community. Just to thank you for your presentation, to remember of us. Thank you very much. You can find David outside.